right, let's get this excursion started. Thank you, Matricula and Crafty, for the hosts. I really appreciate that. Hi y'all, welcome to Tales from Afar. Today we are going to Tallinn, the capital of Estonia. I'm gonna slight apology in advance. I feel pretty low energy today, so if I'm not quite up to my usual sea of dicks enthusiasm, my apologies and thank you for understanding. So, as usual, I wanted to start us off with kind of a shot of the city, and this is not going to be our only shot of the city because this was one of my favorite stops on our trip. Come on, Crafty. What could possibly generate more enthusiasm than a sea of dicks? What could possibly? Anyway, so this was one of my favorite places on the trip. In Rouen, I had a lot of feelings. Here in Tallinn, it was just a nice place to be. It was pretty, it was quaint, the weather was nice. I could have stayed there a long time just to hang out and run around the cute little streets and kind of explore the bits and pieces of the city. As usual, we didn't have enough time, but it was a really nice, a really comfortable place to be for me. So, just a couple of things. Estonia hasn't really existed all that long as a recognized national identity as a nation. It was part of Sweden from 17th century to somewhere in the 18th century when it became part of Russia. And then in the mid-19th century, there started to be some developing national identity, right? Like, this is our language. We're not... Our first language isn't Russian here. It's Estonian. This is our language. This is our culture. We have our own identity and who we are and how we do. Because even though Estonia didn't exist as a nation state, there've been some of the buildings we're going to see today are 12th and 13th century buildings, and there's been heritage and there's been culture and there's been people here much longer than there's been a nation of Estonia. So I think that's important to recognize and acknowledge that formal nations don't always comprise identity. So anyway, Estonia was part of Swedish Empire, Estonia was part of the Russian Empire. And they started to develop what it means to be Estonian, an idea of that, movements around that in the mid-19th century. In the late 19th century, Russia started pushing back against this with Russification efforts, trying to get them to assimilate, trying to spread Russian culture. Not that big colonizing empires ever try and run roughshod over the people that they occupy and oppress. I know, matricula, it's completely it's crazy talk right now. Yeah. In 1918, though, Estonia declared their independence and was promptly occupied by the Germans in World War I. After which Estonia was part of the Soviet Union, kind of on and off. There was some back and forth there, until Perestroika in 1987. And this is where it gets really cool, y'all. So, in 1987 and 1988 began what's known as the Singing Revolution, in which Estonia eventually gained its independence without a military coup, without noticeable violence. And it started with an uprising of national identity and patriotism, but like not the toxic kind, the kind that brings people out to sing together in really large groups, and just, with 5-part harmony and feeling, and thousands of people, and they see this and they say it's a movement, the Estonian anti-Russian occupation movement, and all you got to do to join is sing these songs the next time they come around. And that's your Alice's Restaurant reference for the day. I promise. That's all. And so they've been independent ever since. So it's a long history of being in a place that felt like it had a very clear impression of who it is, of who we are, who live here, what it means to be Estonian, but haven't really had a long time to really freely be that. So it was an interesting contrast in the city. Before we leave this picture, I did want to point out the super tall, pointy, kind of copper green spire here is St. Olaf's, and it was probably the tallest building in the world, or the probably the Western world. Yeah, known world, Western world. It was a very, very tall building, from the mid 16th to the mid 17th century. May have been a record holder. We did not go in there, unfortunately. So, like I said, despite the fact that Estonia as a defined nation doesn't have a super long history, the city, Tallinn, does. It's a port city, so it's been important for trade for centuries and centuries and centuries. And it's kind of got an upper town and a lower town. And these are, at least now, not value judgments, right? It's literally, this part of town is on the high ground, this part of town is on the lower ground. And we started in the upper town because it's much easier for most people to walk down the hill to get into the lower town than it is to hike up the hill to get into the upper town. So the upper town was the walled city. This is part of Toompea, Toompea Castle. And things like this were part of why I just really enjoyed being here. If you've been to Carcassonne, if you've been to some of old French castles or old walled cities, this felt like everything I always wanted those to be, that they were often, the castles I went to in France were often ruins, right? And this happens. You get invaded one too many times, someone breaks your siege, and your castle gets destroyed. These things happen. But the town walls here, the fortifications were really intact in a really beautiful way. This here is one of the two very well-known towers. This is Tall Herman. I bet you can't guess why he is called this, seeing as it's such a short little tower. And the construction of this tower was started in the 14th century. 14th century. Added to in the early 16th to make it as tall as it is now. The other tower that we did not see in person, so I do not have a picture of it for you, is called Stout Margaret, which is, as one might expect, a lower, girthier tower that had more utility as a... So Tall Herman is the lookout. Stout Margaret is a better firing platform, I believe. So different roles in city defense. So we started off here, and from here we kind of walked a little uphill and then around into the city through the walls to Alexander Nevsky Cathedral. Now y'all, we are going to see a Catholic church here, but this is the impressive church in town. This is a Russian Orthodox church. So our guide in Tallinn, this might have been part of why I liked the city, was super cute and also super engaging. She was my favorite guide of the trip. And she talked about how Estonians are kind of proud of how not religious they are. And she went on to say that, we're very proud of us really not being very religious, but we're pretty superstitious for all that. So there's kind of a balance here. It's the country as a whole seems kind of soured on organized religion. So she said that most of the people who go to church here are Russians. So the Russian Orthodox Cathedral figures very largely in the city. So this was constructed in the late 19th, early 20th century. So while Estonia was still part of Russia, still trying to be Russified more. And honestly, for exterior architecture, this was my favorite. We'll see other, in some ways more impressive Russian Orthodox churches in next week's stream when we go to St. Petersburg. But for external architecture, for just like beauty and harmony, this was my favorite Russian Orthodox church of the trip. I love the lines. I love the flowery petal feeling up here. I love the black domes with the gold. It feels very elegant and beautiful without being overmuch. So here we are. And so like I said, this is Nevsky Cathedral, and Alexander Nevsky, I didn't know anything about him. I had heard the name in reference to some Russian Orthodox churches, Moscow, the monastery, and here. But he was a 13th century prince, Alexander Nevsky, 13th century prince of Novgorod, kind of Proto-Russia area. And he was a military leader, known for several legendary victories. May or may not have actually happened. And a monk. So he gets talked about as a monk. But what I didn't learn until I was doing research for this stream is that he took monastic orders on his deathbed and was married for most of his life. Was married, had children, which, if you have been here for other streams, you'll know that this is a distinct difference from all of the lady saints we've looked at. Apparently lady saints can't get married or have sex, but dude saints, sure. Now, to be fair, this is a very Russian Orthodox approach. I feel like there are not nearly as many married Catholic saints of any gender, but Russian Orthodox clergy can marry, can and are encouraged to, on the theory that, how are you going to counsel your parishioners if you don't know what marriage is like yourself? So that's a big difference between Catholic practice and Russian Orthodox practice. Right, Crafty, that would seem reasonable. That seems reasonable to me. And let me be clear, I do not think that all the... I'm not one of those people who's like, oh, well, what do you expect with problems in the Catholic Church? They require celibacy. That's a weak sauce excuse. But I also think that it's reasonable to say, if you're pastoring, if most of your congregation is married, maybe it helps you empathize with and serve them if you also have some idea of the highs and lows of the married state yourself. Maybe just a little. So, right, Nevsky Cathedral. Here's one of the details from the outside, from the front. And one of the other differences between Catholic and Orthodox praxis is Catholicism embraces three-dimensional images. So we saw a lot of statues in Catholic churches. Orthodoxy, as a rule, although I saw some exceptions to this in St. Petersburg, Orthodoxy only does 2D images, flat images. So you'll see a lot of icons. The Orthodox folks are the ones who really took icon painting to a very formalized art form. So you'll see a lot of icons, you'll see a lot of mosaics, like this one. This is mosaic work. And it's of, clearly of Mary with Jesus. And I want to pause for a minute here because the Orthodox theological term for Mary is the Theotokos, the God-bearer. So they're very clear that Mary was integral to this whole process, right? Absolutely necessary. But referring to her as the God-bearer more than Mother of God emphasizes that she was not kind of the sole source for Christ. She was the carrier, the vessel. The ladies are always vessels, right? To be filled. Anyway, in this context, I kind of like it. um, the idea of her carrying, and it also, to me, has the connotation of the work of that, the burden of that as well. So I also have a weakness for Greek terms, so I enjoy the word itself, Theotokos. But yeah, so external detail. And then before we go inside, briefly, another external detail. So the photo we just looked at was right down here, out of frame to the left. And right above it was this mosaic, which is Veronica's veil. And this is largely Catholic, but has some presence in Orthodoxy too. The well-known story about this, the kind of codified, finalized story of Veronica's veil, says that Veronica was a noblewoman in Jerusalem, as one does, who was present when Jesus was carrying the cross through town on his way to be crucified. And she saw him and felt pity for him. And when he stumbled under the weight of the cross, she rushes up to him and wipes his face of sweat and blood with her veil, which ever after bore the imprint of Jesus' face. So if you're ever at a Catholic or Orthodox church and you see a piece of cloth with Jesus' face on it being held by angels or by a woman or by someone, that's what it is. It's Veronica's veil. Now, obviously, this is a non-canonical story. There is nothing about this anywhere in the Bible. The closest, according to my reading, there's kind of an idea that maybe this got, originally this was an extrapolation from the story of the woman with the issue of blood who touched the hem of Jesus's garment. She's later identified in an, again, non-canonical text as Veronica. And then this story was kind of conflated and grew into the passion-related story that we're left with. So, who knows? But it's a fairly common symbol. If I'd thought of it, I would have included a picture of Gaudi's representation of it from Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, because that's cool. That's really cool. Well, maybe we'll look at that some other time. So, a couple of details from outside give you some idea of the art style we're looking at here, the mosaic work, how that works. Then going inside. So first off, this is not my picture. This is not my picture because photos were not allowed in here. We're not allowed in the other Orthodox church we're going to see today. They were allowed in the churches we went to in St. Petersburg, but neither of them were working churches. And I get that. I respect that. But it was very hard because the inside, walking into it, this photo indicates that the church is much brighter than it felt. We weren't there during a service, which is good. That's good. So it wasn't super lit up. It was a little bit overcast that day, so it felt dark, lit by candles and small overhead lights. And this is only one forward shot of this wall here, this screen of icons. It's called the iconostasis, and it's what separates the area for the congregation from the altar. And the doors right here in the middle will be opened at the appropriate point in the service. The clergymen, only men, right, will go back there, prepare the, I actually don't know if they call it the Eucharist, but they'll prepare the wine and the bread, which in Orthodoxy is, the bread is torn apart and mixed into the wine, and everyone gets a spoonful as they come up to take communion. So this is a screen. This is a separation between. Yeah, Crafty. I didn't know a lot of this either until one of my friends in town here is Greek Orthodox, and there are some slight differences in the liturgy, but the basic praxis is very much the same. And I went to church with her once, and I got to see it. And she told me, well, so when I went to church with her, we walked in to the sanctuary during kind of the single Sunday school class for the adults. And the priest was going over felt like an why do we do what we do in Orthodoxy series. And as I was walking in, he says, and I hear people say women aren't allowed in the altar area. And that's a myth, that women aren't allowed in the altar area. That's totally untrue. There's a church in, I don't remember where the church was. There's a church in other city where there's a whole crew of women who have been specially trained and approved on how to enter and interact with the altar area, and they go in every week to clean it. Now, and my friend was just like, oh, I am so sorry. Yeah, well, okay. So, on the one hand, there's a lot about Orthodox praxis that I like. I like, I'm sorry I don't have a kind of a wider and more varied shots of the inside of the church, because there are icons to all sides of what you can see here. And they were in use. There wasn't a service going on, but they were in use. People were there, people were praying, people were stopping in, lighting a candle. It was clear that this church is a place where you don't just come for formal things, you come for a moment, you come for to pray, to express your needs, and then go about your day. It's part of your resources, part of your community. And I like that. I like that built-inness. I like that church isn't just a special occasion thing. And I've talked about this before, I liked the lived-inness of it. I I also like that, we'll talk about this a little bit more later, in general, Orthodoxy doesn't place the same kind of emphasis that Catholicism does on we must account for everything. We must have some rationale for everything we believe. We must at least pretend to play by rational people rules and explain everything. And Orthodoxy doesn't try to bullet point it out quite so much, and is much more willing to let things remain a mystery. Like, how does the bread and wine become the body and the blood? We don't know. It's a miracle. How could we know that? When does it become the body and the blood? I don't know. When the church lady starts making the dough? Probably. I don't know. So, I don't know. I appreciate that willingness to be like, fuck it. I don't know. It happens. I have faith that it happens. That's what faith is about, right? Mysteries. But yeah, not so crafty, right? So as someone who's spent almost no time in churches, it's fascinating to me because bread and wine and candles are important components of my Jewish rituals, but the symbolic meaning of those objects is completely different. Absolutely. From kind of the opposite perspective, when I was a tween, like 13, 14, something like that, and I went to my cousin's bar mitzvah, and I saw him, I don't know if this is a usual thing because I haven't spent a lot of time in synagogues, but did Kiddush as part of the ritual. And I'm like, they wine too? Wine? Yes? What? No? How? And then the more and more I learned and hung out with friends and have, gotten to go to Seders and Shabbos services in my friends' homes, yeah, it's very clear to me, at least, that yes, we are pulling. I say we, like I'm part of this now, but Christianity of all sorts is pulling from Jewish roots and tradition, but with very, very different takes on all that. So can see the remaining threads. It's very different. Very different thoughts and symbolism behind it now. So anyway, there's a lot I like I said, about being in Orthodox spaces, and a lot that I really don't. Was Juniper helping there? Is this a cat on keyboard moment? Aw, hi kitty. It's okay, we like kitties. So anyway, we didn't have nearly enough time at this church either. I did not get to do as much wandering around as I wanted to and seeing all the things. But that's okay, because more than in any other places, I felt my identity as a tourist and I felt like an intruder here. And that's okay. They don't have to cater to me. It's a house of worship first and foremost, not a tourist attraction. Anyway, so I told you we were going to have another shot of the city, and here we are. So you can see this is looking kind of from the upper town down into the lower town, and you can see other portions of the city walls with the orange towers, terracotta towers, battlements. And we were standing up on this viewing platform, looking out over the city. Jamie's taking pictures, and I'm just a little awestruck because it's so pretty. So pretty and so picturesque. And I was just kind of flailing and having some feelings and some awestruckness. It's just really good. It's really good. But yeah, I don't have a lot to say about this except that I really loved it and it was really beautiful. However, I don't know if you can read this. I didn't think about this when I was putting the new overlay in here. This is a picture of some restaurant signage on the town square, right? So this is Balthazar Restaurant, which is a garlic restaurant. So for all my friends in the States who are, yep, crafty, a garlic restaurant. I have so many friends in the States who are of the there is no recipe that should ever call for a single clove of garlic unless it's how to cook a single clove of garlic, and even then use 2 or 5 people of that sort. I felt it was necessary to document this so that all of you know that Estonia is here for you. Estonia is ready for you and ready to feed you lots and lots and lots of garlic. So this is not just an Estonian thing. It's San Francisco too. There we go. 40 clove chicken. 40. See, you can unfollow me if you want over this, but I do believe there is such a thing as too much garlic. I do believe it, and I realize that may make me a heretic. But there can be too much garlic. And if it's raw, it can happen faster than you think. Ugh. No matricula. No raw garlic. And no, the stinking rose is not for me. Balthazar was not for me. I'll show you where we did eat a little later on. But, so this, we can't really see the fullness of it, but this is St. Catherine's Passage, which is part of, it's a little narrow passage on the left side here. We've got the side of an old disused Dominican monastery, so proof the Catholics were here too. And then on the right side of the passage, lining it, there are workshops, artisan workshops of a women's craft collective, which is appropriate for it being St. Catherine's Passage. Although Catherine was more a scholar than an artisan, but still, I feel like she would appreciate this and support this. This is also a good moment to kind of talk about one of the things about Estonian national identity, at least from what I've read and from what we heard in some of the talks on the ship. Entrepreneurship, business sense is a big thing in Estonia. Also, it's one of the most wired in places in the world, where you can, there's Wi-Fi everywhere. Almost all of your government services are online, self-service. And being a business owner, being an entrepreneur is a very big thing there. Now, what I found interesting, the lady who did a talk on the ship about Estonia's history and them gaining their independence and all of that, really emphasized like Estonia's free market and simple tax plan, and just kind of making it sound like a capitalist libertarian utopia. And I'm listening, I'm thinking, right. I wonder if that's the case. Spoiler! Not really. I mean, they do have a pretty simple tax code, it sounds like. But the libertarians would not be satisfied with this because it starts at, maybe 20% per person. 20% of your income. But there's the standard deduction, and if you have children, there's another deduction, and so there really are deductions. And if you're starting at 20%, then it's not, point being, it's not flat rate. It's not actually truly flat rate. And there's a 33% social tax, which pays for your health insurance, which pays for, and some of this may be paid by your employer, but if you're self-employed, you're paying your own social tax to pay for your insurance, to pay for unemployment, for disability, subsidized education, etc. So not quite the libertarian capitalist utopia that was originally described. It does seem like they're pretty streamlined and lean as far as government itself goes, probably in part because everything's online. Sign up for everything online, next to no paper, which is cool. Absolutely approve of. Simplify. But yeah, it's a little misleading. But anyway, so St. Catherine's Passage, we did go into some of the artisan shops a little bit later, and out of respect to the artists, I did not take photos of their wares. I also didn't buy things that I would have to bring back, but there was a lot of really cool stuff, clothes and leather work and just all kinds of really pretty stuff. Like this pottery shop. I was very proud of myself for getting into and out of this pottery shop without buying anything. It was really lovely work, and I particularly liked the art on the doorway because I'm me. I'm me. This is just how it works. So we've already talked a little bit about the medieval architecture in Tallinn. We're going to talk a little bit more about some more modern architecture. I don't remember, and I didn't write this down, and I should have. I don't remember when exactly this house was built. I think it was like late 19th, early 20th century. But this is an example of what happens to you when you're a creepy asshole to your neighbors. So, the builders of this house, they actually renovated this property. It's a young man and his young wife. And before they renovated it, they had a lot of trouble with their neighbor across the street peering in on the lady of the house while she was in disarray, or at her toilet, or doing anything. He was a creepy ass peeping Tom, basically. And yes, scandal matricula. But the husband got particularly bent out of shape around this because not, ooh, you're infringing on someone's privacy and rights, but you looking at my wife? You looking at my wife? Are you looking at my wife? Because dudes. Not all dudes, crafty. But so out of that, no, this isn't gonna fly. You don't get to look at my wife that way. Since when he was renovating this house, he added, I don't know if you can see this, but right up there, leaning over the corner of the house, is a white-haired man peering down into the neighbor's house across the street. So he called out his peeping Tom neighbor in the architecture, and apparently the peeping Tom was so embarrassed that he moved away and left. Hopefully did not spy on any other ladies wherever he went to live. But yeah, I appreciated that a lot. Neighbor feuds in architecture. And I wish I had a closer up shot of this, but you can at least, get the idea. So, I told you that we'd show a Catholic church. This is the functioning Catholic cathedral in Tallinn. It is Toshu pink. I'm not sure why. It is also, as you can see, way, way simpler than a lot of the other cathedrals and Catholic churches that we've seen in previous streams. Just very simple, pretty plain, which to me speaks to the fact that they were not dominant here. That this was not a primarily Catholic space. Here's a shot of the inside, because they didn't prohibit pictures, that just flash, no flash. And again, this is much more spare and open than other Catholic churches we've seen, and then Nevsky Cathedral. You'll also notice there are pews here, right? There are now pews in most Catholic churches. However, there were no pews and only a few chairs kind of off in front of one of the side chapels in Nevsky Cathedral and in the other Orthodox church we're going to see. It's very traditional that unless you cannot, you stand for the whole service in an Orthodox church. In American Orthodox churches, when I went to church with my friend, they had chairs, but she pointed out to me that this is an American thing, and in the old world, where they're hardcore, you stand through the entire service. So, again, differences in praxis. I think standing was much more common in Catholic churches further back in the day, but it persisted longer in Orthodox traditions. So, this is the other Catholic church, or not Catholic, sorry, Orthodox Church. Much less ornate. Still pretty. I liked it. This one was early 19th century, so it's actually older than the Nevsky Cathedral. This is St. Nicholas Church. And this is not my picture either. I found this one online because I realized that I didn't get an exterior shot of this church, maybe because I was really hungry by this point and wasn't on it with telling Jamie what to take pictures of. But I didn't get an exterior shot, so I got someone else's. And but it's older, different style of Orthodox Church. However, again, not my photo. I wasn't allowed to stay inside, but this gives you a pretty good feel for what it was like. Iconostasis separating the sanctuary from, crafty. It's really beautiful. It's really beautiful. It's striking. And what you don't get in this picture is the smell of the incense when you go in. The smell of the incense and of burned candles. And that was also something I didn't get in the Catholic Church. It doesn't seem to pervade Catholic churches the way it did Orthodox churches. And you just walk in and you know that you're in a place set apart. Like, obviously, I still have problems. I'm not going to be part of any denomination, of any religion that doesn't see me as a full and equal human being capable of the same sacramental work as dudes. But they have that whole sacred as set apart thing really down pat. And I don't know if you can tell, but on the left side of the picture, there's kind of a diagonal line of chairs facing facing the left side of the picture. Those were there when we were there. They were set up like that. And there was a cordon, a rope behind them, making it very clear that tourists were not welcome past that point. So I imagine that's where smaller services took place, smaller liturgies took place. But yeah, it was so beautiful. So beautiful. And I'm glad I could find at least one picture. However, outside, where there were no signs about not taking pictures, there was this lovely little shrine of St. Nicholas. And it was behind a fence, so this picture was taken from a fairly good distance. So you can't see probably a lot of detail, but St. Nicholas has a substantial beard, and he's draped in kind of a bishop's stole. There's a candle lit in front of him. And St. Nicholas is one of the more widely spoken of Christian saints, if for no other reason than his connections with Santa Claus and generosity, right? However, did you know that, and this is backed up by canon, he was known for generosity to the needy, he was known for anonymous giving. I'm not sure how you get known for anonymous giving, but he was known for it. I am not going to ruin Santa Claus, Crafty. One day, near the holidays, we'll have a Santa Claus stream in which we thoroughly ruin Santa Claus by talking about all the components. But that's not today. But in addition to being a benevolent giver, so St. Nicholas was, 4th century AD-ish, back when it was still illegal to be Christian in the Roman Empire under the Emperor Diocletian. And so by this time, St. Nicholas is not a saint yet. He's just a monk. He's a brother in his order in what's now southeastern Turkey. And there had been a big convocation of bishops, of church officials, as they did in those days, trying to hash out, what do we believe? How do we believe it? Who's wrong? Who is wrong? Who needs to be chastised? So one of the big first heretics of the church, Arius, was presenting his theological views. And St. Nicholas got so pissed off about someone is wrong in the council. This was before the internet, right? So no being wrong on the internet. But someone is wrong, that he is said to have gone up to and either punched or slapped Arius. And for this, St. Nicholas was stripped of his bishop robes and thrown in prison because it was illegal to strike someone in the presence of the emperor, and Emperor Constantine was there. Now, because St. Nicholas may have been fiery, but he wasn't irrational, overnight, he repented of his actions, though not his beliefs. It kind of feels like a faux apology. By the way, matriculate by all means. Mom calls. You must go. Thank you for being here. So he repented of resorting to violence, but not of why, and was visited by Christ and the Theotokos, who gave him back his bishop's stole. So when the emperor came to see him in the morning, he was freed because he's no longer in shackles and he's dressed like a bishop. Miracles! So he's pretty feisty, as well as a gift giver. So not ruined crafty, not ruined, just feisty. So a couple of last pictures. This is where we ended up stopping for lunch, and there's no big historical significance to this. It was just super cute and lush. It was Cafe Josephine, so very, very lush and modish, and it was also really good. One of the few food pictures from the trip. So I got cider because they had a good French cider on the menu. And I was warm from walking around, and frankly, I wanted a drink. So I got cider. Jamie got this amazing hot chocolate concoction. It was, I don't know what sorcery went into it, because I can never make hot chocolate like that. That's simultaneously so creamy, but such good chocolatey, a good level of chocolatey. I don't know how it happened, but it was amazing and decadent and sweet and good. And I wanted it all, but contented myself with only stealing about a third of his, as he only stole about a third of my cider. And this is marriage. It was really good. So good. So I really enjoyed being in Tallinn. One of the things that I wish here, when our guide earlier in the trip was telling us that that we're not very religious, but we are superstitious. I went up to her during one of our photo stops when she was free and asked, hey, I was just wondering, is there any movement or effort here to kind of revive pre-Christian Estonian religion or the pre-Christian traditions of this area? And she wasn't quite getting me. She was like thinking that I meant just like really early or unorganized Christianity. I was like, oh, maybe, no, pagans? Are there any pagans here? It's like, oh, yes, there are pagans. And apparently there's a relatively respectable contingent of Estonians trying to restore pre-Christian traditions of that area, which I think is pretty cool. None of that really shows up here. I went and did a little reading about it that night, and super cool, super amazing. But there was nothing in my pictures that I could pin that on, so it didn't show up here. Maybe one day in a strictly storytelling stream, I will have Estonian mythology for y'all, but unfortunately today is not that day. So that is Tallinn, that is Estonia. I do not have next week's event up yet. Right, Crafty, if there aren't existing sacred sites, there's not a lot to visit. And there might be some interesting ruins or sacred sites outside of the city. I feel like those things are more likely to be found in the countryside, and we just didn't have that kind of time, unfortunately. But I bet that if they exist, someone has taken pictures of them. And if I talk about that mythology in a later stream, I bet I can find other people's pictures of those. So, next week we will be going to St. Petersburg, and I don't know if we're going to have 1 week in St. Petersburg or 2, because there's a lot. We might have 2 weeks in St. Petersburg, because you kind of need 1 just for the Hermitage and 1 for the rest of the city. But we'll see. I might pare it down and then just come back to some of the stuff in the Hermitage later. So we'll be in St. Petersburg next week. I think on Thursday, might be Tuesday, we'll see. Watch this space, or watch the Social Justice Bards Discord. And thank you, Crafty, for being here. Thank you for hanging out with me. Thank you, Matricula. Thank you, folks who lurked. Oh, yay! I'm glad you had today off, too. It was really nice to see you chatting, although, obviously, work and lurk is totally valid, and I am happy for whatever way you can participate. Let me see, who are we going to host? Okay, I'm going to be a bad streamer and just sign off because I'm feeling pretty exhausted and low energy. But thank you for hanging out, and I will see you next week, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.